All right, good morning. I am Scott Barclay. I lead healthcare at Insight Partners. We're just approaching like $100 billion under management. There's no ego in those numbers. We invest at every stage. And Insight's really all about software and scale. But we invest at every stage because it's about founding teams on a certain journey of how we're going to hand healthcare kind of to our grandchildren that operates at a significantly higher quality but lower cost than it does today. The goal of today is to give to you, and so we've brought together wonderful founders and leaders, and I'm really excited to get into it. Let's first tell everyone who you are. Celine, I'm going to start with you. Celine, what's the name of the company, and give me in one sentence what the company does.
Yeah, my name's Celine Halioua. I am the founder and CEO of Loyal, and we're developing drugs to extend dog lifespan.
Where are you from?
Austin, but I live here now, like any good CEO.
And what's one thing about your history before Loyal that tells us who you are as a founder?
Vegetarian for life, first generation American, didn't know what a venture capitalist was until I was like 22.
Excellent. Mary, welcome on stage. Thanks for being here. Tell us your name and your role in the company.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Rozenman, and I am the CFO and CBO of Insitro.
And what does Insitro do?
So Insitro is a company that leverages machine learning and AI on huge amounts of data that we integrate from humans and print in automated labs to uncover novel genetic intervention points in diseases, including those that we completely don't understand today.
That's amazing. And as CFO, you've had a journey before this. Tell us something before Insitro that tells us about you as a leader.
So I think I'm kind of a combination of a few different perspectives on life. So I have been a lifelong obsessive scientist. I did my PhD with David Liu, who just won the Breakthrough Prize. So I've always loved the idea of being really creative and using huge amounts of data. And then I spent a bunch of time at McKinsey and on the investor side getting grounded in really serious quantitative finance. And so every day I try to balance those two views on life.
We will not hold McKinsey against you for the rest of this panel, but we will go with scientist meet CFO on a very ambitious journey. David Coe, thanks for joining us today. Tell us what you do.
Hey everyone, my name is Dave Coe. I am the CEO of Calm. Calm is all about kind of being with you every step of the way in your mental health journey. And by focusing on that, we've had over 180 million people download the product, and now we've moved into a couple of different business lines across enterprise and healthcare.
And David, you have a rich leadership and entrepreneurial history. Give us one thing from before Calm that tells us about you as a leader.
I would say for me, being in healthcare has been pretty personal, especially working in a company like Calm. When I was young, I was 14, I suffered my first panic attack when I was at a very young age. I didn't quite understand what was happening. And now to kind of be here at Calm and leading this company and really now having kind of open conversations about mental health all over the world is something that's almost like come full circle, and I'm very proud to work at the company and what we do today.
We kind of work and live in interesting times. We're going to talk about the markets. We're going to talk a little bit about technological change, but we're going to come back to founders in the journey. And that'll be the most important area for you in the audience. Let's start with the markets. Any of you jump in, but I will just say it's a time of turbulence. Any of you have any comments on kind of these turbulent markets and what it's meaning for your company from a capital or leading the team standpoint?
I can start. So for context, Loyal is about 5 years old. We're Series B stage, which raised about $150 million to date. And we've never made a drop of revenue, right? We are developing FDA-approved drugs. It takes a long time. Hopefully you'll have a drug approved in a year, but we are can't ultimately control our timelines. And so I think one of the interesting things in this market is how do you, when the markets are uncertain, people get nervous, they tend to pull away from innovation. They tend to pull away from novelty, and they tend to go towards what they understand, what they know, right? They don't want to go to their LPs and be like, yeah, I lost this money on this company, and also I invested in a dog longevity company, right? And so you have to really think about how do you position the timing, the organization, the company, so when you go out there, it's blazingly obvious that it's a good deal and it's going to make, it's a good company, it's a good partner, and it's going to make you and your fund look really, really good. Versus, I remember back in 2021 during ZERP, like honestly, my Series A, I did my Series A during ZERP, like terrible deck, did not think it through, like did not understand our milestones. And I was able to raise like a pretty top tier Series A just because the market was so frothy that everybody saw the opportunity, even though I didn't like spoon feed it to there. So I think really just the rigor and the quality and the bar that you have to reach to be able to raise capital just goes up exponentially when you're in markets like this. But it's always, I believe, still possible if you have a good business.
Maybe building on those themes, I think certainly, we are in a very chaotic and uncertain time because of what's happening in Washington, and there's nothing worse than uncertainty for, I think, kind of the investment dynamic. At the same time, I think there's a lot to be said for taking challenging moments, especially when those challenges are macro, right? When they're happening outside the walls of your business, and then using them as an opportunity to recommit and to embrace, different kind of ways of working and a kind of operational discipline that maybe is hard to access in moments where things are really, really effusive in the outside world. And I think that there's a lot to be said for taking those moments of potential sort of external kind of pain and using those to make yourself stronger, to build new muscles that actually help you get ultimately, hopefully, further on the journey of what you're trying to build.
Yeah, that was definitely my highest growth rate, was the post-ZERP implosion. It forced me to become a CEO at a level that I had never been made to before.
You're having different conversations, you're taking harder decisions, and I think ultimately that discipline should make all of us stronger.
I mean, my observation is we ask and we recognize in the very best founders a speed and an impatience that really infuses an energy where you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's just an energy and a speed you can't find in a huge company. And yet we also ask that they really plan with first principles against the true long term because they're doing something very hard. And I think the people surrounding you, supporting you, from your family to whom you choose to take capital, need to have a deep understanding of you in doing that. Let's stay on the state of the markets and talk about the FDA for a minute. Your three companies represent very different areas within kind of healthcare, software, and technology across bio, humans and pets, and the mental health journey. Any comments around kind of the turbulence in Washington and specifically on the FDA and what you are seeing, or any advice you would give to founders who are planning to start to work with the FDA for the first time, have never done so, and they're planning to do so in the next year?
That's more for you guys.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I think the latest numbers, and I honestly haven't checked it this morning, and things are changing all the time. I think the latest numbers I saw was something along the lines of sort of a 10,000 employee reduction being driven by Secretary Kennedy, of which I think about 3,500 people should be leaving the agency, which is about 20% of the workforce there. So I think invariably we're going to have some downstream consequences from that. That could be a positive thing. It could mean that there are more efficient processes. Unfortunately, that is probably countered a little bit by some of the chaotic implementation that has kind of come along for the journey with the changes. So I think, again, unfortunately, the dominant note is probably uncertainty. But there could be positives as well as negative consequences. Curious if you've seen anything negative so far, because if you haven't, maybe that's good.
I haven't, but I would also not like to tempt the chaos demons to
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about when you're developing something that's regulated by any of the three-letter agencies is you are extrinsically dependent on that agency, right? One of our board members is Blake Scholl from Boom Supersonic. They're building supersonic jets. You can't fly fly a plane without getting FAA approval. We obviously need FDA approval. And one of the things that happens, like people are always surprised, like when we submit something to the FDA, I submit like 1,000+ page dossier. And we just like dump it on their desks. And we don't hear anything for 6 months. And so all of our timelines are driven by the explicit date that the FDA is committed to get back to us. And so one of the things that we have to think about is like, how can we be anti-fragile when before there was literally written in law 100% certainty, I think it might be actually 90% that they're committed to, but whatever. They're basically 100% certainty that on this explicit date, we're gonna get our efficacy package back or a safety package or our manufacturing that has determined our entire fundraising strategy for the last 5 years. And now we have to actually have a confidence interval around it, right? And how does that impact? What if I don't hear back on that day, right? How is it going to happen? And you have to, again, be anti-fragile to these changes. So it's just the uncertainty adds a lot of variance, where you might actually be in a very strong position as a company, but the uncertainty will always drag you down no matter what.
Probably about half of the 80 companies in our portfolio make some claim or interaction with the FDA. Our guidance is unchanged in engage agencies like that early and often. And second, build a very clear two-sided sheet of the paper of all the things you can control with your team while being open and honest about the things you can't, but plan your capital knowing there's a lot of things you can't control. Mm-hmm. Let's move to, and as a quick aside, Mary has a real set of insights on how founders should talk to investors in these types of uncertain markets. We'll run out of time, but let me tag her as someone that any of you should try to catch, as we come off the stage.
Congratulations.
Let's shift. Greatly overstated.
I would say probably 3 or 4 days into working with ChatGPT, moons ago, that's like a full technological cycle. The one thing I said confidently was, I think the rate of change just changed. I still make that statement confidently today. Where are any of you seeing a real impact on the frontier models changing how your teams operate or how you're building product?
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I think we're all immersed in the conversations around AI. I think it's really interesting with a company like Calm today. When we first brought up the conversations about how we should start to use it as a company, it definitely caused a lot more stress than it did in terms of productivity. But eventually, as we started continuing the conversations about how we could thoughtfully engage in a narrative around human-centered AI, the conversations got easier from a kind of just acceptance of how we use it internally, and then really started for us to think about how we create products externally. Each of those types of products we're thinking around require different levels of potential compliance because we do work with healthcare providers, for example, who will want a different type of security and data measures around how we're thinking about it to how we think about it around direct-to-consumer and internationally. So it's a long-winded way of saying we are embracing it as a company, and I think it's in every company how you, in terms of embracing AI, is going to be different, and you'll hear this from Mary and Celine. But I think for us, in terms of how we think about mental health, you'll see it a lot more in terms of consumer-facing products very shortly.
Mary, kind of compute and discovery within life sciences. Did everything have to get started over a year ago? Like, where are we in accelerating that side of life science innovation, and where is Insitro?
Yeah, so I think there are probably sort of two sides to that question. The first is around the role and the impact that large language models have had on the way that we work within the biotech industry. I think for that one, the fact that we happen to be a biotech company is less relevant than the fact that we are also a tech company and we embrace technology to improve our operations and workflows on all sorts of things, including within my procurement and finance organizations, as well as for colleagues in the lab. So there are a whole bunch of operational things that have been enabled by the fact that we have an internal instance, behind a firewall. It's called IGPT. You can guess where it came from. And that's been a huge enabler. We've done like company-wide hackathons to make sure that people were well trained up and embracing the technology and really thinking about how to improve what they're doing day to day. But those day-to-day things are, hey, summarize a paper for me. Hey, help me write this email. Hey, help me do this review for this colleague by integrating a whole bunch of objective data that others have submitted on them. That's sort of on the one hand. I think there's an entirely different conversation to be had around how we apply these technologies, even if not LLMs, large language models, to transform the process of drug discovery and development. And that is probably for a different panel, but suffice it to say that those are different models because they don't use language that's pulled from the internet and a whole bunch of images of cats and dogs and whatever else. What they use is fit-for-purpose data, either on molecules and their structure and function or objective measurements of human state. Imaging data for humans, radiographic data, pathology data, and then for cells, imaging, omics, et cetera. So two very different things to think about, both very, very important.
And before we move to Celine, let me just pause. As a CFO, how are these new tools and capabilities scaring you or accelerating kind of how you help run a firm from a CFO's lens?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there are so many ways that we have already been able to embrace efficiency and optimize a whole slew of operational processes for the business by embracing these technologies. And it's not just LLMs, by the way. It's a whole slew of technologies. I already mentioned procurement, accounts payable, all of these sort of operational things that used to require kind of step-by-step activities by humans that can now be greatly accelerated through automation.
And then Celine, how has the reality or the hype of AI, revolutionized loyal in the past year?
So I would like to apologize if any of our investors are in the audience, because we don't use AI at all. I use ChatGPT sometimes. I'm like, okay, I got to give an all-pause presentation. Like, how should I structure this? But I think for us, at the stage of the company that we are at, it's just, we're much more of like a clinical development and pharmaceutical commercialization organization. And while I think there's some interesting things that could be done in again, I've mentioned these literally 1,000-page regulatory filings. I think there's interesting work to be done there, albeit it's not getting it to the 80% line. That's the difficult part. It's getting that last 20%, right? And from my perspective, as a CEO trying to get a drug approved, I know how, I have the team and I know how to write a regulatory dossier so that we maximize the probability of getting that FDA approval. And I don't care enough about AI to add a risk or try to I'm not playing a game of trying to shave off time. I'm playing a game of getting the end state approval, right? And I'll do the thing that increases that probability of success. And realistically, that's there's not always an ROI on trying to find efficiency in that world. The other challenge I've found is that you don't have all the data, right? So you guys are doing lots of really awesome preclinical work to support development and discovery of new drugs. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, as you obviously know. In the clinical side, we can't, for example, model if our drug's going to extend, Fluffy's lifespan, right? The amount of inputs are just they're not quantified, they're not understood. And to build that would be 5 different companies instead of Loyal. So I'm sure we'll have some internal operation efficiency stuff. Maybe we'll think about it more as we get into commercialization. Obviously, there's all the low-hanging fruit of customer support. And when we actually make money, how do we manage all the finances and all of that? But for us, keeping the team focused on where we're excellent and just continuing to execute where we're excellent has been the strategy I've taken so far.
I will just say there are great companies that are developing technologies for the integration of huge amounts of data to enable, streamline, and improve the regulatory filing and submission process.
Yeah, they definitely are.
For those in the audience, if you guys are wondering about that, there are some great companies working in that space.
Yeah, it'll be interesting though to see it's the creative aspect of it where I'm skeptical. Because for us, we had to create, it's not put together data, okay, you have this objective endpoint, oh, the data looks good, data looks bad. It's how do you convince the agency that this drug should be approved for lifespan extension and should extend the quality of life of a large or giant breed dog? That is just such a creative insight where I don't think it's derivative. I think it's not just straight writing it, it's really empathizing with the agency, pulling it all together. And I don't know, maybe I won't have a job in a year, but it's just not been worth parading into for us.
I just want to compliment the organizers and Derek. I mean, in the end, you're giving most of your life to this entrepreneurial endeavor. You'd like it to count. Look at these 3 people and what their companies represent. And like these things did not exist a few years ago. And these are things we want to birth and then truly scale to the world. And so I don't know, it's kind of fun. Like when I call my mom in a couple of days, I'll tell her about the 3 companies on the stage. And it's a privilege to see what's possible. And then you get closer and you see that it's hard. David, you brought something up in your bio. I'll start with you, but this question will be for all 3 of you, which is, you've been a founder, you've been a CEO, you've been an executive at one of the country's largest companies, you've started from scratch. Like, what is hard about the founder's journey and about leading today that we don't talk about often enough?
That's a great question. I would say it probably centers around these couple of things. As you said, I've been fortunate to have taken a company public. It was a gaming company, Zynga, in 2011. And then after that, sold the company to United Healthcare, and then started my own company and merged it in with Calm. I think the biggest difference that I've seen is that the pace at which the expectation is to grow has greatly changed over that time. And some of the parameters around that in terms of like getting to profitability, making sure that you can have the right types of product market fit, doing it with smaller, incomplete teams where we had probably larger, more complete teams as we were trying to take companies public back then. So I definitely see the pace has changed. I would also tell you like how we work has so changed, and so it's often made us to adapt. And having remote employees, Calm, for example, I've had to adapt as a leader, is more of a hybrid work environment. I've wanted everyone personally to be in the office every day, but it's just counter to how the company can work efficiently. So I've had to work around that and kind of also adapt. Instead of having 3,000 to 5,000 people in the office all together, now we're spread out all across the country and having to work in a narrative and really working on those communication skills. And then lastly, just being a lot more thoughtful now that I'm at Calm, even though I am not a very calm CEO, really starting to think about how I kind of the well-being of our employees and being a lot more open to conversations around that, being open to the conversations around mental health. And it's been awesome. It's been an awesome experience. And for those of you who are thinking about getting into healthcare, and depending on how regulated it is, I would tell you it's a perfect time to get into healthcare. I felt that when I first got into healthcare in 2013, everyone was like, "Don't go there. It's too regulated. It's too hard." But I would tell you it's exactly the opposite. I think when you can find the right types of product market fit, you could solve hard problems. That's where like you can unlock so much value. And so I think there is this great opportunity right now for those who are thinking about going into healthcare today to enter it.
Yeah, it's paradoxically easier to build something difficult, which I think a lot of people don't realize, but people want you to succeed when you're working on something that's important, and it just is such a tailwind in a way that maybe a more obvious or like easy, potentially upfront businesses.
I mean, I think this idea, it's paradoxically, what did you say? It's paradoxically easier to build something that's difficult. I will add a coda to that, which is that because people really want you to build things that matter. And I think in this moment, if you sort of reflect on the history of Silicon Valley, or the broader sort of technology landscape, we've had these sort of transformative technologies that have led to the emergence of companies that shaped all of our day-to-day lives, right? The internet made Amazon possible, mobile made Uber possible. So we're now in a moment, I think, in healthcare where there is sort of a collision of a whole slew of these transformative technologies, not just AI, ML, but the availability of huge amounts of data, the ability to modulate biology in ways that would have seemed impossible, a decade ago. All of these things are completely transformative. They're coming together. It's exactly the right moment to build a company that harnesses the energy of that and really drives impact. So I think it's an amazing time, actually, to be building in this space.
Healthcare is trending north of 20% of GDP for outcomes far deleterious to most of our Western, Northern European, and Southeast Asian peers, who, by the way, spend about 11% for frankly better outcomes. I used to say, yeah, we should probably have half, healthcare physician founders, half, technology founders who've repeatedly built things. What is unchanged is the size of the TAM of taking on these oligopolies. My perspective has changed, though. Just give me a founder who gets his or her teeth into a hard problem. We can augment you with people who understand every hard clinical, regulatory, and software problem. But you have to have a speed and energy against these big problems. Otherwise, the oligopoly will just keep making a lot of money, and it'll keep being a tax on society. You guys are awesome. Thanks for your time, for being here. Thanks for giving.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.